Good morning. This is Jeff Johnson. I'm president of Black Commercial Inc. in Spokane, Washington, and I'd like to welcome you to the show Lilac City Leadership.
Thanks, Jeff. It's great to have you this morning. Jeff, talk a little bit before I dive into more of the color around Lilac City Leadership. Talk about your career progression and how you got to your current role.
James, I grew up in a small farm town in Iowa and had a lot of great work experience as a young man. And during my sophomore and junior years of college, I had a job across the street from a real estate company in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. One night I saw a sign go up that said career night, and I went over to investigate. There were two really nice brokers there that evening that kind of shared with me about the business and encouraged me to get my real estate license. During the summer, give real estate a try. This was residential, on the residential side, and then finish my formal education and come back and go to work for the company, which was called John Zacher Realtors. So I got my license, got started in the business, and then quickly determined that it was a really good fit for me. And unfortunately, to my parents' dismay, I never went back and finished my formal education, but that kind of launched me into the real estate business. And then a few years later, my wife and I moved here to Spokane, Washington, where I got a job as a commercial property manager, and then went into commercial sales in 1980. I worked my way into a niche of working with companies that lease, buy, and build office buildings. So I specialized in companies that used office space, and then was able to get some leadership positions in a number of companies I've worked at, which brought me to NEI Black, where I run our commercial brokerage division today.
That's awesome, Jeff. Thanks for the color behind your career progression. Here in the Lilac City Leadership podcast, we're all about talking about the great leaders here in the Spokane region and kind of bringing, a lot of us go out to different podcasts and different online content to try to get more leadership advice and content. And it's usually somebody that's kind of, maybe on the East Coast or somewhere outside of our day-to-day realm. And so I thought, let's put together some leadership content of people right here in Spokane that are really making a difference to those of us who are aspiring leaders and emerging leaders, and really get content that's close to home for all of us. So that's what Lilac City Leadership is all about. And no better way to kick off the first episode than a great leader like Jeff Johnson here at Black Commercial Inc. So I want to talk to you about my experience when I first met Jeff. We were connected through a common acquaintance that we both know. And before we got together for coffee the first time, I had mentioned via email that I noticed the book that you wrote. And I have that here today. Before we actually met for coffee, though, it showed up on my desk at the office, a copy of it. And the book is Cash Flow Forever: The Real Secrets of Real Estate Investing. And so if you haven't checked it out yet, you can buy it on Amazon, and I'm sure a few other book sources as well. But what impressed me about that was just Jeff's overall leadership approach. I got a copy of his book, and it had a personal note from him in the front cover. And a guy like Jeff is very busy and holds a leadership role here at Black Commercial Inc., but took the time to write a personal message to me, and so that has really stuck with me since. Since I have the book in front of me, I'll just read through a couple of quotes here that I really enjoy, and the content of the book is geared toward real estate investing, but a lot of it applies to leadership in general. So a couple of quotes that I liked that just really kind of apply to leadership as well. If you want to be successful, it's just this simple: know what you're doing, love what you're doing, and believe in what you're doing. And that's Will Rogers. And then the second quote I noted here is, doing little things well is a step toward doing big things better. So pretty powerful there. That was Harry F. Banks. And then the last one, really like this one: big shots are only little shots who keep shooting. So kind of words of encouragement there, applied to real estate investing, but also really applicable to leadership development as well. So I like that. Just impressed by the overall kind of attention and ability to connect with people in the community that you've done, Jeff, and really appreciate that. I'm going to start with a topic that I'm very intrigued by. We've talked a little bit about this, but are leaders born or made? And so talk about what you think on that topic.
James, I was fortunate growing up in a small town in Iowa to, number one, learn how to work at a young age, but also I was exposed to some good leaders. The local gas station owner who I went to work for when I was 16 was a leader in our community and taught me how to deal with people. My father, I was fortunate, my father was our local Boy Scout master, so I got started in the Scouts at a young age. And as I look back, I find that scouting was a real great way to build and learn leadership skills. It is a good goal-setting environment because you need to work for merit badges, so you learn to work toward goals, but you also need to work in a team with your pack or your group or your troop, and there are a lot of projects in scouting that are kind of team and leadership related. And then I was fortunate to, as part of my scouting career, work in scout camps in a leadership position, and so that's kind of where my leadership started. But I do believe that leadership can be learned over time. Then I was very fortunate when I got started in the real estate business at a young age to be encouraged to take the Dale Carnegie class. And I think that was another step in my learning about leadership or having leadership experiences at a young age. So I do believe that leadership can be learned.
Agreed. And I think while there are people that are born with maybe more tendencies toward leadership, there are so many different styles of leaders that despite kind of what you're born with, you can create a leadership style that's pretty effective by the things that you pick up along the way. So cool to hear some of your personal experiences with that. What are some of the most important things that you've learned kind of early in your professional career, maybe when you were aspiring to be a leader, when you became maybe an emerging leader at a young age, that have shaped the way you are today in your role?
James, when I began my career as a real estate broker, people began to ask me to volunteer in different capacities, committees, nonprofits, boards, and I took that opportunity. And as I look back, I think one of the great ways to learn and practice leadership is by volunteering. And there are all kinds of opportunities in our communities to volunteer. And so I began to take advantage of those, first sitting on committees and then working up to boards and then eventually chairing a number of boards over the years. But boards provide great leadership experience for anybody who wants to volunteer their time.
I think of that as one of the great parts about Spokane. There's just so many people who are willing to volunteer for a lot of great organizations, and we come together as a community to do a lot of awesome things. And then a byproduct of that is people learn great leadership skills that are, wanting to be part of those boards and get more involved in the leadership roles that are involved there.
Right.
So as we were prepping for the show, you mentioned two different types of leadership: earned leadership versus granted leadership. And I want to hear kind of more about the distinction there.
I read a great book by John Maxwell on leadership, and John has written, I think, over 80 books. He's a wonderful leader. He's a wonderful teacher of leadership. I've had the opportunity to hear him speak. I've met him and been at lunches with him and read a number of his books. And in one of his early books, he talks about these two types of leadership. Let's say you're in a family company and your family provides you with a position.
Mm-hmm.
So that's leadership that's been granted. But you also have to earn leadership. And earning leadership is a matter of letting people know you care and developing their trust. So you can't lead if you don't have people's trust. And you can't lead if people don't believe that you have their best interests at heart.
Mm-hmm.
So to be a good leader, one of the skills of being a good leader is to be a good listener. So a leader's job is to listen to all the input of those around him and guide the organization or the conversation to a good decision. one of the things I learned from one of my mentors, Ray Lawton, who was president of Lawton Printing here in Spokane, was that it's important to set the tone with any committee or board that you're going to be involved with. And the tone of that committee is, you got a lot of different brain power and backgrounds that come into that room, and you're going to have, and you want to have good discussion that comes from both sides of the table.
Right.
But the goal is that we should be there for the better of the organization, not necessarily our agenda. Now, that doesn't mean we can't share our ideas, our distinct and unique ideas.
Sure.
But the goal is to pool these ideas like into a funnel, and so what comes out is the best result and the best decisions for that organization.
I like it. You touched on building trust with those that work for you and with you. How do you balance? So you're talking about listening and building trust through listening. There are ideas that you'll hear that you don't agree with, and maybe you don't implement them.
Sure.
How do you go about still building the trust even when you're not implementing things that are suggested to you?
Good question. I think the key is that as a leader, you need to listen to all your constituents, whether you agree with them or not. And as you listen, the goal is to learn and try and understand where they're coming from, and maybe then be able to share with them your perspective once you've listened to theirs. And obviously in this day and age, we have a little bit of a challenge with that politically.
Sure.
People are unwilling to listen and get a little polarized, but it's really difficult to lead if you don't listen to both sides of the issue.
Gotcha. And so importance in acknowledging that you did hear, even
Right.
if you're not in agreement.
Yes. And again, the job of a leader is, the leader's job is to make the tough decision. So he has to gather the information from his staff or his board, depending on the situation. A board, it's usually going to be a board decision, and you're guiding a group of people to a best decision. If you're a leader in a company, you need to gather all the information, and then it's your job to make that decision.
Right.
Some will agree, some won't, but you need to make the decision that's going to hopefully move the company forward or do what's best for the company.
Right. So from what I've seen in interacting with you, Jeff, I would kind of describe you as a servant leader and kind of a style of a coach. And so how do you balance serving your team as a servant leader and making sure that people at the same time don't take advantage of you?
Well, I think that's a really challenging part of leadership, and that challenging part of leadership is when you've got a team player that's maybe not reaching their potential or they're off on a tangent, then you have to be able to sit down with them, talk to them about maybe the positive parts of the contribution they're making to the company, but also be frank and honest with them and say, as your leader, as your mentor, as your friend, here's an area where we need to have some improvement. Or have the tough question and say, is this the right position for you? Are you really happy? It appears you're not being productive in this position.
Right.
So you then go from maybe leader to coach and counselor, but it is important to be honest with them when they're not achieving the results that need to be achieved.
Right.
And it takes some skill and finesse to do that. My mom said, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And if you think about it and be creative, there's always maybe a positive way to get your message across without creating undue pain for the person on the receiving end.
Nice. That good advice from Mom.
Can't guarantee it, but.
So shifting gears a little bit, you've been in the real estate industry for quite a while, real estate investing.
Right.
You've done kind of A to Z probably as far as different roles within the industry. How do you keep yourself charged up and energized and ready to go each day? Are there routines that you do to kind of get yourself there?
Well, my wife has a little different personality than I do, and one of our neighbors is this Energizer bunny, and so my wife will say to me, gosh, I just don't have the energy that our neighbor down the street does. Where does she get it? And my response is, we each come with a different engine. And our friend down the street, Catherine, comes with a V12. and she's going full speed at all times. So I think it's a little bit physiological, and fortunately, I guess I was born with a pretty high energy level. So I like to get up in the morning, plan my day, execute my plan, and I'm excited about life. I'm excited about real estate, and I think we have the opportunity to kind of choose our attitude each day. And when I get up, my attitude is I'm going to make something positive happen today. I'm going to make a positive contribution. I'm going to enjoy this day to the fullest. So I think part of it is choosing to have a great attitude, and then I think it really helps to be physically active and good exercise. I read a quote the other day that you need to expend energy to have energy. So I now get up, go for about a 40-minute walk. That gets me kind of charged and ready to go for the day, gives me time to think. And so I think exercise, whether it's morning, noon, or evening, is one component of keeping up and being energetic for the day.
Nice. So you've got the V12 engine, which is nice, and then also physical activity. And I think I ran into you one day on High Drive. You were taking a walk, and
That's right.
running by with my son. So
absolutely, you were out getting your energy for the day.
Getting my energy for the day. So what's the best way that you found to, on the leadership side of things, keep your leadership skills sharp and up to date?
I love to read. I'm a voracious reader. I get up every morning and I read Wall Street Journal headlines. Most of my reading is in the evening, but during my career, back in the day, I would buy and listen to cassette tapes or CDs in my car of other leaders. I subscribed to John, as I mentioned, John Maxwell had a weekly, or maybe it was a monthly message he would put out, and I subscribed to that. So I have always focused heavily on making sure I continue to educate myself so I can stay current and then pass information on to those that I work with, my brokers. So I do a lot of reading, and today I listen to podcasts. There are
awesome.
A lot of great podcasts.
We like those.
Yes.
So I believe we're all kind of on a leadership journey, and so there's things that you do very well, Jeff, in your leadership style. What are some of the things that you've been working to improve?
I'd say the biggest two things that I need to work on. I'm kind of a creative kind of guy. I come up with lots of ideas. So for me, the one thing I have to always work on is focusing on the few. I want to focus on the high-value, difficult tasks, a few high-value, difficult tasks every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I have this process where I sit down, usually in the morning, because I'm a morning person. I go through my to-do list, and I want to pick out up to from 1 to 6 high-value tasks, and I write them down on a 3x5 card, which I call an action card.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my goal, is to focus on getting those things done. So that's number one. Number two, I tend to be a kind of person who wants everybody to get along, a little bit of a pleaser. So sometimes it's a challenge for me to deal with conflict. I try and be as diplomatic as I can, but sometimes you just got to jump in there and get things out on the table. And that's probably my weak spot, is dealing with conflict.
What are some steps? I'm a people pleaser as well, and I work on that. What are some particular steps that those of us who have that tendency can do to kind of work on that on a day-to-day basis?
What I've found over the years for me is, if I'm going to go into a conflict situation, I want to be very well prepared and think through actually what I'm going to say, and try and boil it down to what are the real issues. Because and what I say to my brokers as we deal with clients, there's the message and there's the delivery. And a lot of times the delivery is something we don't like. So the question is, what's the client really saying? What's the underlying issue? He may be angry, or he may be upset, but what's the issue we can kind of peel away the onion and get down to and say, okay, what is bothering you? What is keeping you from moving ahead? What is the real reason you're upset? And then hopefully it's easier for us to deal with that situation. But I think overall, preparing, thinking through what the real issue is, and then knowing what you're going to say, so that you can discuss the issue, make sure you listen to the other person's side, and then work toward a solution. And I think that's key, is to keep in mind, hey, we may have, Bob Conklin used to say, I can't help the way I feel, but I can help the way I think and act. So we want to work through the situation so we can resolve the problem, even if we're all not feeling good about each other.
Yeah, that's really helpful. My next question is, I'm talking about leaders in general within the Spokane region, not necessarily political or non-political, but just think about leaders in general in Spokane. What do you think that those of us who are leaders now and aspiring to be leaders, what can we do better as a Spokane community?
Good question. What can we do better? Well, I think one of the things as up-and-coming leaders to grow in your leadership role, as we talked about earlier, is balancing your life with family and kids and work, but then volunteering consistently and regularly for leadership positions, so you have that experience and you have the opportunity to rub shoulders with other leaders. So if you get on a committee, and hopefully it's a well-led committee, or even if it's not, you're going to learn from being on that committee. How does the leader run the committee or the board? What do they do? What do they do well in running that board? What areas do you see where maybe they're not being as effective in running that board? So we can learn from observing other leaders. And we have a lot of wonderful leaders in Spokane that I've learned from over the years, and I've had many wonderful mentors going back to when I just got started in the business. And so one of my original mentors, Frank, was the one who he gave me books to read. He encouraged me to take Dale Carnegie. He was an encourager, and I learned a lot from Frank, both about leadership and real estate investing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So my last question is, who's the coolest person you've met recently here in Spokane that you kind of walked away with an encounter with them thinking, wow, that was great?
We are fortunate to have a lot of great young leaders in Spokane, and I happen to be involved in what's called the Spokane Angel Alliance, and the Spokane Angel Alliance provides a platform for new and startup companies to present to the group in hopes of raising money, and also actually and sometimes looking for some leadership to help with their growing companies. So I've heard a number of great presentations lately, and one of the companies that I was fortunate to invest in is called Spiceology, and Spiceology was started by a young man by the name of Pete Taylor, who, when I first met him, he was the chef at Kavanaugh's at Priest Lake, and he was really into spices, and he has built this amazing company, but he is a rah-rah guy for spice and cooking and food, and a great leader of his company, and his company's doing really well. Another young man that I've met here a number of years ago is Lewis Hurd. Lewis graduated from LC. He played professional basketball, I believe, in Canada and South America, and he has a personal training company. And this guy is super motivational. He is energetic. He's building a great personal training company and working with athletes, young and old. And those are two inspirational young leaders that I've met and encountered, or had the good fortune to meet and encounter here in Spokane the last few years.
That's really cool. I just like the fact that, you know, you could take something like spices and have somebody that's very passionate and injecting leadership into that, and then, you know, somebody on a different end of the spectrum who's very passionate about exercise and training, and they have a similar mindset toward pursuing that. So cool stories. So the next segment of our show is a cool opportunity that we've included here, is to have an emerging leader from Spokane come in and ask a few questions of our guests as well. So today I have the privilege of having Michael Truex from Avista Corp. He's a project manager there, and I'll kind of let Michael jump in here and introduce himself a little bit further with some of his leadership biography.
Great. Thanks, James. Thanks for having me. And Jeff, as always, appreciate your time and giving this opportunity for both James and myself. Like James mentioned, I'm a project manager at Avista. I work in the generation and production and substation support department. focus most of my time on our hydroelectric dams in the Spokane and also northern Idaho areas. And just recently graduated from Whitworth with my MBA. And
congratulations!
Looking forward to gaining some valued time back, as well as some more opportunities to get engaged in the community here. So thanks for having me, Jeff. I had a few questions for you, and one being, what's one of the greatest challenges that you've faced in your time as a leader, and what did you do to mitigate that, and also what did you learn from it?
Thanks, Michael. I think one of the biggest challenges I faced in my career was a frivolous lawsuit against our company by an attorney who we got to court. I'd never met the man before. He sat across the aisle. Both the attorneys representing him and our firm kind of made their presentations, and I could see that the man was upset. And I said to him, I said, "Sir," I said, "you seem like you're a very angry man." And he said, "Yes, I'm an angry man." He said, and I won't go into the details, but he kind of shared with me why he was upset, and it wasn't really our firm. We just happened to be in his path. And so he pursued this suit against us with a little bit of a thought that there was some conspiracy against him. And after a year, the court made it clear that we weren't conspiring and that he hadn't been taken advantage of, and we prevailed. But that was a really kind of tough thing to do, knowing that here's this attorney kind of coming after us with both barrels and all his legal background and making us jump a lot of hoops, and we really hadn't done anything wrong. So that was emotionally challenging. And then actually it was challenging for me to watch some of my staff and brokers go through depositions, which were somewhat demoralizing. But I think it gave me a little thicker skin, and it gave me a perspective on what people go through when they are involved in a lawsuit and how important it is to avoid them at all costs.
That's great. Thank you.
And actually, let me finish. What I learned from that is that many times people sue not because they have a case, but just because they're angry. So it was a good learning experience.
That's very interesting. Thanks for sharing. As James and myself are, categorizing ourselves, I guess, as this emerging leader, what advice could you give aspiring leaders as they seek opportunity and growth opportunities, whether even internally in their companies or even if they start to look outside their companies? And what do you guys here typically look for in aspiring leaders?
One of my brokers said to me last week, we were talking a little bit about leadership, and the topic came up: the leaders show up. So to be an aspiring leader, it's really important to show up. In other words, to be at work on time or be at work early, to show up at company events, to be an active participant in your work, and also to be an active participant in boards. So I've been on boards where there were, a number of inspiring leaders, but it was obvious after a few meetings that there were a few people who just weren't committed and didn't show up. And I've been on boards where I've actually had to call people and say, hey, you haven't been at the last 3 or 4 meetings. If this really isn't important to you, we need to find somebody else to fill your spot. So being a leader is showing up. Being a leader is participating. As we talked about, being a leader is a good listener. And I think going the extra mile and putting in the effort to differentiate yourself from those who aren't going to go the extra mile.
That's great. Thank you. You said you're an avid reader. Is there anything that you're currently reading?
I am reading, I've got 3 books in my pile. One is Principles by, I believe it's Ray Dalio, who is works in the financial markets. I've just started reading that book. I have a book on body weight exercise. I can't tell you the name of the author. She's a personal trainer in Seattle, and it talks about how to get your exercise and build core strength and muscle without using a lot of extra weights and things. And let's see, do I have a 3rd book? I've got 4 books in my pile. I have a book in my pile by Stephen Covey's, who wrote The 7 Habits of Successful People. I have a book in my pile by his son, and it talks basically about, I've just started it, about what's the one most important thing you can do to either advance your career or advance your company. You know, and part of being a leader is the ability to focus on a few really high, as we talked about, few really high value tasks, and he kind of takes it another step and says, what's the most important thing you can do to advance your career? Maybe that's getting an MBA. Maybe that's calling on a really important customer that you'd like to get their business. I've got a friend back in Detroit who spent 10 years calling on Snap-on Tools to get that account. They'd been with another broker, and my friend John just kept calling every year, and finally something happened, and after 10 years he picked up the Snap-on Tool account for the whole world. That was a phenomenal account. It took him 10 years worth of time and effort to pick that up. So,
Wow, very focused, very relentless.
yes, focus.
You've mentioned it a little bit already, can you describe the importance of leading in the Spokane community here and areas that your firm contributes, and more specifically to where you see needs in our immediate community?
Well, I think one of the reasons for leading on the, so to speak, nonprofit side is that I've been very fortunate, our company's been very fortunate to earn a good living in our community. And so I think it's incumbent on us as leaders to give back. And there are so many opportunities to do that, both with money, time, and talents. And so one of the areas that our company has participated in is the Bite to Go program. And the Bite to Go program was started by a friend of mine, Tom Stevenson, and a couple from the food bank. And the goal was, or there was a need, the need in our community was that we had elementary children going home on Friday night with nothing to eat all weekend. And once Tom found out about this need and found out how other communities were meeting that need, he started a nonprofit called At the Core. And At the Core partners with the food bank and finds companies, businesses and churches to partner with schools. And so Tom now has a partner school or business for all 65 elementary schools. Our company partnered with Bemis. And so on every Friday we take turns, and our staff feeds about 85 children at Bemis. And I'm actually now also on the At the Core board. So I'm trying to help that organization grow as we now move into junior high and high schools. So that's one area where we are able to be involved and help in the community.
That's amazing. You talked about exercise and reading, and can you just talk a little bit about the importance of self-care? Seems like just the business and busyness of our society and things at the moment, it's easy to overlook the importance of taking care of yourself and things that you do to take care of you so that you can serve others well.
Well, I talked about exercise. I think it's important to have time to read and contemplate. And part of my exercise program as I go for a walk in the morning is time to think about what, the important things in life. So I need to have good mental health for myself so I can take good care of my family. And I have a faith foundation, so I weave that into the mix so that my focus is appropriate. Let's see. I had a thought there, lost it. Let me think. A lot of people, it's kind of the norm that people spend a lot of time watching TV, and I find that I think there's more value in reading. There's nothing wrong with a little entertainment, but as we know, there are a lot of families who get sidetracked with TV, and today it's really easy to get sidetracked with social media and the internet. So I think it's important to keep those things in balance. As I go to events, as both of you do, you see people just focused on their phone.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's important to have a balance there. Go home, set the phone aside, and make sure that, again, we are focusing on our health, our families, and what's important at work, and not getting distracted. I think it's really easy to get distracted today, especially with social media.
That's really good. Yeah, thank you. I just have one last question.
Sure.
If you could go back 20 years, what would you give Jeff for advice?
If I went back 20 years, I have been fortunate. I was fortunate at a young age to begin volunteering and being involved and gaining some of those leadership opportunities. If I went back 20 years, the one thing I think I would do is I think I would have brought my children with me to more events and exposed them to some of the things that I've done over the years, or that my wife and I have done over the years, and we have, but I think I would have increased their involvement. I've got a friend who comes to my industry real estate conference twice a year, and David has, I think, 7 kids, and every year, he as his kids have been growing up, he's brought one of his kids along to these industry events. I mean, there's 800 commercial real estate brokers there, and Dave's the only one with one of his kids.
That's
and
awesome.
I think that's very admirable.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to, as part of our being engaged with our family and giving our children a vision for how they in the future can be leaders or at least contributors to their community.
That's great. Thank you.
Well, Jeff, Michael, gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure and a privilege of mine to have you on the Lilac City Leadership Podcast. Thanks for spending the time. I know both Michael and I have a couple pages of notes that we've scribbled here from your leadership wisdom, so thanks for sharing, Jeff.
Thanks for having me on, James, and nice to spend time with you, Michael. I'm glad I could share a couple ideas and wish you the best with your program.